back is one of the librarians that works on that collection, in which that collection focuses on Hispanic and Latino writers here from Texas and especially around the San Antonio area. Veronica, your own book, your main character is Olivia Silverstein, whose name is very similar to yours. How much of yourself did you put in this book, and were there others in your life whose experiences you drew from?
Sure. I have three main characters, Olivia, Fatima, and Vanna. And they're all me, and they're all not me, because if they were all, my life was very boring. So they're experiences from everybody. They're my students, they're my mom, they're my sister, they're my friend, Denise, which is still here. They're everybody. What's the question again? Oh, what was the question?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
What did you say was the question?
Oh, how much of your characters were drawn from personal life and especially the character of Silverstein?
Okay. Well, as you said in the intro, the reason I wrote this book was because I got $450 to go to Barnes & Noble and buy books for my classroom library, because I was an ESL teacher and they wanted me to have more books. So I went there, and this was years ago. This was like back in 2002, 2001. And I just didn't see a lot of books aimed at my girls, because I was trying to get my girls to read. Because my boys would picking up scary books or whatever, but my girls, there was Princess Diaries, and there was Sister of the Traveling Pants, and a lot of books. This is a while ago, okay? A lot of books set up north with middle class and upper middle class characters. And so I decided to set mine here, and with working class characters, because that's where I grew up, and that was my experience. Olivia was kind of me. She was quiet in high school. Her father died too, and she was just kind of trying to make it, trying to connect. It was all about connections. Connections between mothers and daughters, connections between girls, and connections with boys, all of that. Actually, my mom, when she read it, she stopped halfway through the book because she did not like the mother characters. She put it down and she said, "Everyone's going to think I'm a terrible mother. How could you write this?" And she just put it down and she wouldn't. So then she picked it up and she finished it and she loved it. And the book's dedicated to her. And believe it or not, I get so much flack about that dedication. I did not think people really read dedications, but I dedicated it to Elaine Goldbach, the Dream Crusher. This was all your idea. Because my brothers and sisters say that her superpower is crushing anybody's dreams. Because my sister wanted to be a director, and my brother wanted to be a tennis pro, and my other brother wanted to be a guitarist. And she's like, yeah, great. She would help them, get the lessons, whatever, but go to college, get a degree, get a job. Get a day job, and then, do whatever. I said, "Oh, you're just crushing my dreams, Mom. You're just, not supporting me." But with me, I always wanted to be a teacher since second grade. In first grade, I wanted to be a carpenter, and I realized I'm not that coordinated. But I wanted to be a teacher. That's all I did. Read, write, and go to dance class. And she was always telling me, you read so much. You should write a book. I can't do that. I'm not that kind of person. Teresa could do it. That's my sister. And, she just kept reminding me of that, and then that's where this book came from. It came from her. And, so that's, Olivia has a struggle with the two worlds. Fatima has a different struggle. She has one of her parents is an immigrant, and Vanna has a different struggle. She's from Dallas. So there's a lot of culture clash and relationships.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about English and Spanish. In Edna's book, there is a character named Juan who is often punished for speaking in Spanish, and you mentioned a teacher that abused a student, that student named Juan. Would you tell us about how that character developed and how that some of those experiences with English and Spanish in your own educational experience, and we can talk about some of that instruction of English and Spanish and how much was allowed at school.
Okay, that actually Juan is the real name of a real person, And it wasn't until way later when I started writing my stories in Té de Canela, Cinnamon Tea. And just to give you guys a little bit of background on that book, I danced with Simon & Schuster. I say I danced for a year. I went back and forth with a young adult editor at Simon & Schuster, and it went all the way up to the editorial board after a year, after editing, re-editing, taking a lot of stuff out that was uncomfortable for the editor, not really me. Just to be told, you know what, we can't publish your book because it's too regional. People don't want to talk about these things. They don't exist anymore. You know, they're not relevant to today's market. And so I said, that's fine. So I decided to self-publish. Well, after I self-published, that little book was used at the University of Missouri St. Louis for 5 semesters in women and gender studies. And I had Simon & Schuster tell me, these stories are too regional. And there, my audience was black and white, African American and Caucasian. And they got something out of the stories. So one story is very touching because it's true. And the thing was, it wasn't like I said until I was an adult that I realized that this lady was not out. You know, we called her a mean teacher. It was beyond that. She was there to break Juan's spirit. But as she tried to break Juan's spirit, she also tried, you know, it worked against us because we took on that negative energy, and it broke our spirit too. Juan is a real character, and I'll just do a short summary. Juan lived with his grandparents at this place called Las Piedritas, you know, which is by Freer. They didn't have any electricity, no running water. They lived still in a jacal, you know, in a hut. They had goats. So Juan never had his homework. And so the teacher, Mrs. Moore, would make an example out of him in front of the class and would verbally abuse him. But not only that, she used one of those long wooden rulers with the metal edge, and she would strike his hands. And you could see the middle bend. And I get very emotional because I get upset by myself, because I could have gone home and told my mother when she asked me, how did school go today? And if I would have said, you know, Juan got abused, she would have been down there, but I never did. Oh, nothing happened. Everything was fine. I was in the 4th grade. So it wasn't until later as an adult that I came to terms with all this, that I still had a lot of grief over Juan. And so Juan didn't have his homework because when he got home from school, his grandparents didn't think that school was important. What was he going to do with school? He had to feed the goats before it got dark. And after dark, well, you know, what could you do? You couldn't do your homework. There wasn't enough light. So the teacher would call him a liar and call him lazy. He just didn't want to do his homework and would verbally abuse him, and like I said, physically with the ruler. And so I run into people like that still today, that people that are out to try to break your spirit, and nobody has the right to try to break our spirit. And that's where the movement was so important, because like I said, I wasn't really part of that because I came after, but then it helped me to say, we have a voice and we have to stand up when we see wrong being done, not just for us, but it could be African Americans or whatever. I am working right now on a book. It's called Negreta. And my mother was very angry when she heard the word, because negreta is the N-word in Spanish. But that's what I was called on the school ground. But not only that, sometimes my own mother called me that when she got mad at me. And it hurt. It was deep. Said my mother got very angry, and she says, where did you get that name Negreta? Like, how dare you? I'm just like, well, that's what I was called, and you called me that, before that chancla flew. Before the shoe flew to hit me on the head. And sometimes parents don't realize what damage they themselves do. So Negreta is a historical novel where I will embrace my African American roots. Because we can call ourselves Chicanos, Latinos, Hispanics, or whatever, but the thing is that we have not, as a people, have not done a good job of embracing our African roots. I myself am African on my mother's side, about 11 generations down. On my father's side, I am African American, 5 generations back. The thing is that my mother told me just recently, she said, it's not enough that you're Chicana, that you're a Mexicana, now quieres ser negra también. You want to be black too. I'm just like, well, I can't help it, it's where I come from. So I do this research because the more research I do and the more I know my family history and where I come from, who can say boo to me in America? I am European, Native American, and African American. Isn't that the fabric of America for most of us? So all I'm saying is that I want to embrace the whole me.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yes.
Are you going to be opening up?
Sure, yes.
One of the issues I think that has become apparent today is that identity is such an issue. As a professor for over 40 years, that was always the thing with my grad students, who am I? So it is an issue to be explored. But the other is that, I'm sorry to know how old I am because I've been teaching for over 40 years, is that Tomás Ibarri Frausto came to speak to our junior faculty members at UTSA. And he said, for Evelyn and I, it was really easy because we could tell, just like your story, that we were discriminated against. It was very obvious. We knew what we were fighting against. But for you, the new generation, you're seduced into thinking that things are okay and that things are fine. And let me tell you, it ain't fine. The same issues that you guys fought, voter identity now is a huge issue. The whole aspect of redistricting is an issue. Voters, immigration issues, it's an issue right now. Yet, yesterday's newspaper, if you read it, they're going to build over their Goliad Road. So not only are we not in the history books, Mario, they're going to build over our history. So there are issues that we as a community have got to be involved in. We have to become activists again. The revolution has to start again.
Oh, interesting. Some questions. Would you all like to take some questions from the audience?
I have to jump in. I have more of a statement. Thank you so much. I was just, I was listening and talking to you guys, but realizing that something is very wrong and you brought it up. Thank you so very much. What's going on is that if we allow ourselves to use the same language of the occupying regime by using the words such as immigrant, such as identity doesn't matter, whatever we call ourselves, it definitely matters. At which point do we start to speak English? At which point do we start to speak Spanish? To lose our identity of tamales, chile, tomate, chocolate. It is extremely important who and what we call ourselves. It is extremely important that we do not use words such as immigrant, because that's how we're deported. If we allow ourselves to call ourselves immigrants, then we obviously don't belong here. Then we can be deported. We are migrants in our homeland. Thank you.
Very importantly, remember that Mexican Americans have been here sometimes in many situations way before even the Mayflower. Even Longoria, her own family, if you would watch Faces of America with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, traces her roots all the way back to 14 and Spanish colonization. I promised this fellow here.
As a comment, the revolution hasn't stopped. It's just that some of us revolutionaries are very insignificant. We haven't got PhDs. We haven't moved on. We're from the working class, and we're fighting the fight because we're struggling just to survive, and also take on these issues that the highly educated or learned members of our community have taken on. The revolution hasn't stopped. We are indigenous people. The majority Chicano, to me, who comes from the 7 tribes of the Chichimeca or Mexica, mean, where else do you get the word Chicano from? And so as an identity, it's to recognize our indigenous roots and then a struggle for our homeland. Because to be removed or deported within your own country and told you're a foreigner and an alien, and for you to accept that, or for us to accept it, today is El Grito, right? The revolution in 1810 started because the indigenous people were still slaves of the Spaniards. So when you're talking about Hispanic heritage, you're talking about the colonizers that enslaved our people. So I'm not for Hispanic heritage. Our indigenous people went into revolution in 1810. 16 va a ser el Día del Grito y la Revolución de México. We're still in a revolution, and we need to keep that in mind. We're an indigenous people. We're still suppressed, repressed, and basically told we are not who we say we are. The government deals with people that they put in reservations in prisons and recognizes them as indigenous people. We have no recognition for our identity. When I was a teenager, I was in the walkouts. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. To me, it was just follow the crowd. Now as an activist, I know. It's about identity, and it is about identity. How can we fight for our human rights when we don't know who we are? Our human inherent rights are denied by not just this government, but all the occupying governments of our continent. And hopefully we can unite such as they did for NAFTA and for CAFTA, and finally do an intercontinental identification of indigenous people so we can work anywhere in the continent, traverse anywhere in our own continent, live where we want to without being criminalized.
Let's let the
My
panel
statement.
respond. Thank you very much for your comments.
I just wanted to respond. I think that it's important that you don't exclude my generation, my people that have grown up in the Hispanic world, where you, for as far back as you can remember, you were called Hispanic. Chicano was something for another generation, for a more active generation.
Hispanic is a cult, like
There
a
is-
colonizer.
I know, but you need to understand that there's no cookie cutter. I can trace my Hispanic heritage back to Santa Ana. My great-great-great-grandmother came up.
I can say something to that. When I was in first grade, and she won't say it, I lived by Wood. I didn't know any English, but when I saw a teacher walloping my brother with a paddle, don't think I just stood there. I went over there and I cussed her out in Spanish, and I bit her finger and ran
Just because of the way I was raised or the words I grew up with, does that make me less important or less part of what's moving?
We're not saying that at all. Let me just say this. All I'm saying is that no matter how old you are, no matter where you live, if our personal life is improved, it doesn't mean it's improved for everybody.
No.
And it is a matter of class, and it is a matter of color. So those are issues. So just acknowledge it. It's not being personalized to anyone. It's personalized to the whole issue of how people live.
But you have
So
to.
don't take it personally.
Can I get the comment from over here, please?
Excuse me.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I can identify with all of you up there. In the 60s, I was out chopping cotton down Eagle Pass, going up to Florida, chopping cotton up there, working in the field, 12 years old. 50 cents an hour. Okay, struggle. I realized that I was different when in a rural community, there was only one school. It was a 4-room schoolhouse, so everybody went. Todos los gringos y los mexicanos y negros también. So, okay, we all faced our struggles independently and individually. I've been reuniting with my indigenous heritage. My great-grandfather was Apache. My great-grandmother was Yaqui. Partially so, and I'm trying to find out exactly how much. But my interest for the panel is the indigenous nature of our existence, because somos morenos, tenemos sangre indígena. It's obvious that we're And then scientists have said that we would go all the way back to the African, that the first man, first woman were African or black. I'm not trying to argue any of that. I accept all of it. And for the question is the spirituality of this movement and how important is the Native American aspect of being a Chicano. I see, like with Jose Angel, the struggle of trying to just get equal rights in the schools, and you're the younger generation as having more or less assimilated. I see it in my younger sisters. They're 11 years younger. They don't speak Spanish. And I see that as a terrible thing, because even though Spanish is a foreign language, English is a foreign language. So all of our Raza over here were speaking there were over 2,000 separate languages on the continent before the arrival of the European. I want to know what the spirituality of your existence is in the realm of, say you are a Chicano, or not. You don't have to be anything these days. Our identity is, or we can also be individuals. But we still see the oppression in the schools, like my sisters don't speak Spanish but there's a lot of indigenous knowledge in that Spanish, a lot of terms, the caló, that come all the way from indigenous language. Chante, all these words are indigenous, come from indigenous language. And who knows how many of those 2,000 languages affected us that we're missing now in our culture.
Would someone from the panel like to respond?
Can I just explain what I was trying to say?
Oh, before I finish, as Dr. Clark said, the revolution needs to be started again. I'm for that. I'm totally for that. I was involved in the Raza Unida movement and the Chicano movement, and I accept it as a graceful effort by a people to maintain their identity and achieve equality in this goddamn racist national thing called America.
Yeah.
What I just wanted to get across is that there are a lot of Hispanics out there that don't feel welcome in this movement, that feel like we are aggressively not wanted as part of it because we have assimilated or we aren't full Hispanic or whatever. And that is the point I was trying to get across. You need to consider, well, you need to be more open, or you don't need to, I guess you can do whatever you want, but it might be more helpful if you would include the generation that's not, the people that aren't comfortable in this group.
Dr. Gutierrez, would you like to give us a comment?
I was just going to point out that we have this great mosaic here. All of us wearing different sunglasses, seeing the world in a different way. And there is a guy by the name of George Leacock who talks about framing and how we use code words, to either perpetuate a frame or unwittingly, accept a frame, as you pointed out, with the word immigrant and so on. But let's all recognize it. We all see the world differently, and that's because of our ages, our generations, our geography, our ability with languages, our knowledge. We all don't start at the same place. And so we're always going to have this recurring problem, that some of us are very politicized, others are totally dumb still. Okay? And it's, it's circular. We just got to keep working at this all the time. The call for revolution and the call for change, that's vitamins, the talk. That's good. That's wonderful. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the other realities. One, our generation, if we contributed anything, was that we broke with fear. This collective fear that our grandparents and parents had, as somebody over here to their father. I remember we had it. I didn't yell like cucuy. We had this fear not to speak up, not to accept. And then the Catholic Church doesn't help us. Es el destino, así te tocaba. Dios lo manda. God damn, this was all very difficult to deal with all of these crosses that we have to carry. But this generation, because they were activists, we broke with that and challenged that fear. So that's something that we need to recoup before we start the revolution. You got to stop being afraid. That's hard to do. The opposite is also very hard to do. To say we're going to do this for all kinds of people, well, that's Jesus talk. And to give love away is very difficult. We're very selfish. I want you to love me first. So, using fear and really showing greater love is very important. We're going to learn that. And I don't know that we have. The second thing that I observed over time is that as a collective group, we run away from our Chicano movement struggle. There are other peoples, for example, the Jews. I don't care what generation they are. You can't spend more than 2-3 minutes talking to them and they'll bring up the Holocaust. You can't talk to an African American who is younger than me by 40 years, and he'll bring up King and Malcolm X and their civil rights movement as if they did a lot of things. ¿Y la raza? So yes, as Manny pointed out, some of our children know what we did, but most of the children don't. And it's not in the curriculums, it's not in the schools, and regardless of how many more books we write and how many more documentaries that we presented, we're still behind the curve. We are not collectively as a people promoting making our assertion reality. We're not describing our world and our frame of what it is that we want to see. So some of these things we can take care of ourselves. The last thing is that be prepared. It's easy to be an armchair revolutionary. I would only get in there and take it on the chin. Because, we don't know how to take care of our leaders. We don't have any kind of support system and networks. You step out there, you're going to be on your own. Okay? Maybe MAYO and I will show up. Maybe there'll be a fundraiser here. But know what you're getting into. Let's not trade here who's got more merit badges.
Mario, would you like to respond also to some of the comments that have been made today? Would you like to also respond?
How to keep the revolution going, Mario? How do we keep it going? How do we integrate? Okay.
Takes a lot of money. Let's get a grant.
I'm actually leaving, but excuse me, Mario, but with all due respect to you, Mario, I think if I look around the room, I've been an attorney next week 40 years. I was with Jose Angel when he was there, running the streets. And let me tell you, this is a man that can change the future for us. We don't want a revolution. Hey, Jose Angel, you're a political science professor. You know about politics. What we need right now is for you to run for governor. As funny as it might seem, that's the solution. We need trained people. We don't need mocosos to run and tell us, what we need. Somebody like, you're not old. You're as old as you feel. And let me tell you, I would vote for you. And I'm sure there's be thousands, but you got to get away from that fear like you were talking about. And I have to
This is a classic example of this. We just come out my door. I don't know we work for the same line. With all respect to his comments, that was a problem when we started. The people were sitting around waiting for a Messiah to show up. That's not going to happen. We got extremely qualified and competent individuals right now who are taking on the task of change. But that's not enough, because there has to be many more. And those don't just show up whenever something breaks out. You have to invest time in creating those. You have to just like the movement inspired a lot of people to get involved, to be active and continue being active, we need to keep passing that tradition on. Helping individuals acquire the resources, the knowledge, and above all, the courage to say, I'm not going to use another word, but I will say the courage to say, ya no tengo miedo. We got up and said, no tenemos miedo ya. We had it. We grew up with fear. The moment we say, ya no tengo miedo, yeah, we were organizing, a lot of people were criticizing, but very proud politicians would say, these guys are communists. So they were in a room, some guy that was a bureaucrat who was overseeing some grants that some of us had gotten, and he said, Mario, you gotta stop being active. You gotta stop all this politics, or I'm gonna take your money away, and I'm gonna make sure that you never again, ever get another government job. And you know how I told him? Why? Because the moment I showed that man that I had fear of losing my job, that would have been the end. And that's why I can stay here today and say, I'm not afraid, but I want others to not be afraid as well.
We have time for just 2 more comments from the audience. I'd like to get the woman with the orange patterned blouse right there, and then we'll play with yours.
I'll just say really quick what I have to say. I wanted to address the lady over here.
Can you speak up, please? We can't hear you.
Yes, my name's Griselda, and I wanted to address something to this young lady. I have a granddaughter. My son married a Caucasian young lady. And, well, I have a pochita at home. And she comes to Grandma and says, Grandma, am I Mexican or am I white? And it's a typical question that a young 6-year-old would ask. And I go, well, mija, from me, you're a Mexicana. Because you're my color. You know, her parents, her grandparents on the other side tell her, well, you're white, you know. And we talk to each other very well. But what I want her to learn is that my father was half German, and I'm the darkest one in my family. And my mother always said, you're a Chicano. And I always listened to my mother. My father didn't get that involved in politics. He did at one point. But it's very important that we teach our children. And I know that you lost your father. And God forbid my granddaughter lose her father or her mother. I love her, whether she's a Chicana or Gringa or Borja, you know, because she's my granddaughter. But if we don't educate our children, such as what Angel said one time, and now is that time. That time is here and now because of many things that are happening here in the United States, in America, with all of us, economically, socially, ethnicity, with everything. And I'm really frustrated at the fact that I live in Austin, and I'm from Crystal City, and I go into these political arenas, and they're not very, they don't welcome me as well as they should, because we're all Hispanics. And we're all trying to shoot for the stars, and we're all trying to shoot to make Texas blue, and we want more votes, and et cetera, et cetera. I think it's that time, like Angel said, that we need to re-educate our children. We need to reorganize and not be afraid. And I think he said 3 other more things that we needed to do. He's got the formula. And I think Angel Gutierrez and other leaders can help the ones that don't know enough to defend ourselves against the government, to be better leaders, to be better people, to be better Mexicanos, Chicanos, whatever you call yourselves. We need to regain that respect. We opened the doors at one point back in 1969, and that chapter was closed. And I think it's that time to reopen it. And I'm hand and challenge him to help us, because he was our uncle. I think that we need those people to come back. MAYO is another person that I think is very important in this picture for all of us. And we need to ask them. We need to go to them so that we can learn, the people that are like you that don't know enough about your heritage.
I know about my heritage. I'm just trying to say that as a movement, the more people you have in your movement, the better. And if you cut out a whole swath of people who call themselves Hispanic,
Nobody's cutting anybody out.
you see the aggressive feeling that's here. My
Cutting
sister who
yourself
lived
out.
in Mexico, when she lived in Mexico, she said she faced less prejudice than when she lived here about being a Hispanic. It's a very big
There's
issue.
such a thing as DNA. We've had our DNA. Apparently, my DNA comes from the central of Mexico. I'm indigenous. There aren't enough Indians from that part of Mexico to really document it on this DNA that they're trying to do for the U.S. But I went to, when I started teaching in 1970, there was no bilingual education at my school. I had to go and actively seek it because my principal would not allow it. From there on, I was involved, very much so. But I didn't know how much Mexican I was until I got the DNA. So we can all get a DNA if you want proof.
We're going to need to end with this gentleman's comments and this gentleman's question.
I just wanted to ask, all four of you, what would be the next step? Or what is the advice that you can give everybody in this room? What would that be?
Gracie Flores was alluding to what she's going to ask me later, I suppose, but she also commented on reorganizing. So that speech that I gave one time at our lake here. But what I want to say, in answer to your question, is what we've discussed here, basically, at least Mario and I, is stuff that happened like 50 years ago. These are, the world has moved on. Like 2.5 generations since. That's what we hear. Okay? What we need to analyze now is we've got all of these different generations. We've got this Chicano generation, and we're dying quickly, believe me. So who have a lot of experience and can tell these stories. We also have a lot of younger generations who can be witch troopers, the boots on the ground. And in between here, we got people that are middle class. You guys, you got money. You're looking for things to do. So we're organizing the wrong folks. We need to be focusing on our middle class, the Hispanics, the Latinos. Let them argue between Carlos V and Napoleon III. It's okay. That doesn't bother us. Okay, soy más indio que tú, No. Let's work on our class basis here. We've got people with money, with resources, with experience. We've got a talent bank sitting here. Look at all the PhDs and lawyers, all these people that we've got. We know what to do about certain things, okay? But we don't organize them. We're not looking at the future. Now, last thing, and this one just kills me. And I challenge you. Look at Mulder, look at the CLR, look at or ask the Castro brothers, or anybody, organization or individual. Everybody talks about how we're going to be one of 3 Americans here, within 2-3 decades. Do any of these people have a plan of what we're going to do when we are that? Doesn't they know what we're going to do? None of these websites have a plan. None of these websites have an answer. None of these have a map. None of these have direction, instruction. It's just this mythical Aslan. We're going to get there. We're going to be the critical mass. We're going to, as we used to say, we're going to paint the White House brown. Really? But if we don't know Home Depot, we can't even get the paint. We need to have a strategic plan individually and organizationally, and we don't. We need to have our middle class join and be the forefront of the struggle. Right?
It's a very real problem, yes. You're asking, for example, myself, I ran for city council in 1969. That's 43 years ago. So if you add that many now, you'll know that I'm now, if you know math, I'm 73. In that span of time, I just want to make a brief comment about that race. That campaign for city council here in San Antonio in 1969 is a case study in transformational grassroots politics. We were able to together organize a coalition of people, neighborhood groups, individuals, professionals, and take on the political machine that dominated local politics. Had a closed system, wouldn't let anybody else in except themselves, only the one they chose. And as I had started earlier, there was quite a bit of frustration about that situation. So some of us said, we want to change that. Others have been working at it before and laying some groundwork. But it was not until that campaign that all that frustration was galvanized, the need, the hunger for change. We organized that modern coalition, the Committee for Modern Betterment, composed of neighborhood groups. The MAYO organization that had been working already 2 years to lay that groundwork. And we sat one time. We sat in a room, and all the leaders who were there, the old ones, they were there making plans to take over. And then one guy stayed and got up and said, addressing me and my cohorts, said, you young guys, we need you young radicals. We need the kamikazes to crash the doors so we can take over. And I said, oh, wait a minute. We're not about suicidal, we're not suicidal, we're not about to commit suicide. We're going to be around long after you're gone. And myself and four of the guys walked down that, literally pissed off at this guy who made that comment, went on and sat. We walked 6 blocks down, Southside Camara, sat at a bar for 3 hours and said, okay, what are we going to do about this? And then finally, this one guy says, we got to run against them. So in the next half hour, we said, I want to run for city council. And we took up. That is, less than 4 months before the election in April of 1969. We made it public in January, so we had 2 months to organize. But we were able to build this mass movement of neighborhood groups and families. We have here some other people who are here. Well, Joe walked out, but his brothers were in a group called Capital of Brothers. We had a series of backyard rallies. We had hundreds of soldiers walking the streets, knocking on doors, distributing literature. We had other committees working the milligram machine. We didn't have word processor or computer. Cracking the manual milligram machine to produce the literature for the campaign. So we had the neighborhood rallies, the Capital of Brothers putting on the skits. No saco nada en la escuela, highlighting the problem, the one about police brutality, and then some people who were characterizing conditions, that out what conditions people were living in the neighborhoods. So that's what it took. We got up and said, we're fed up. We went out and organized it. And that organization, let me correct myself, that campaign began the process of the demise of the two government league. I ran against the incumbent mayor, and that itself created mass expectations and admiration and motivated others to get involved. Because a running kid with nothing, not even a BA degree yet, said, I want to take on the mayor. But I said I was not afraid, and we took one. And when the election was over, the result was counted, I went up and told my group, when I walked into our victory party, right? I said, I got up on the table and I told them, we lost the election, but I am now the mayor of the West Side. Now, why did I say that? Because when you look at the voting statistics, the report, the box by box count, you will see that in all the West Side, almost all the West Side precincts, I beat Walter MacArthur by margins of 2-1. That gave others the inspiration to continue working. And 43 years later, who is mayor? When you walk into that office, you will see a poster. 2 years later, we're in again. You will see a poster. There are 4 people in there. 2 men and 2 women. Rosie Castro, Gloria Cabrera, Willie Benavides, and my son. So I'm now there, still the rest of the I want to correct some earlier comment that I made in reference to the chickens that are coming home to roost. And that is that I got my rifles mixed up. I meant to say Syria and not Libya.
We can take just one last comment and a question.
I just, real quickly, I just wanted to say that I'm very blessed to be a Chicano. I read that on the U.S. Army regulation. That's what I am, American of Mexican origin. So that's what I identify myself with. And I love it because when I was a kid, she had trouble with bilingual. I was forced to take bilingual when I was in elementary, but I didn't know what they were saying because my father raised me with English. So when my grades were low, they took me to principals and they say, are you having trouble or something? You don't speak this? And I was like, I don't know what they're saying. They're speaking in Spanish all the time. So they were like, oh, we didn't know. So they put me in English class. And well, then I graduated and all that. So then I went to the Army, right? Basic training. And the guy, I was the only Hispanic there. There was other Puerto Ricans and stuff. But there was a lot of blacks and whites. And I would say y'all. They were like, what? And I go, why? You were saying y'all. And I was like, oh, I'm from Texas.San Antonio, Texas. You're weird Mexican. Yeah, I know. So then I got sent to Germany. And in Germany, you know, Germans everywhere. And I lived in a small little town. And I got homesick. So I called my mom and told her, please send me some rancheras and some polka music, because I missed it. So I took it to this bar that I used to go to. Sorry, drink beer. Anyway, I told them, can you please put this tape on? And they were like, yeah, sure, Victor. So I had good friends with them. And they put it on, and it was the polkas and rancheras, and you know, I was drinking and I started going, hi, right? And then they were like that, what is that, Victor? And I go, that's what we do in Texas. And I taught that about 30 people that night how to yell, how to do that. And they were to do the podcast and a chat, because they have their own accordion music. They were listening to it, and they listened to the tape around 3 times. I was like, wow, this is big. So, my identity, right? I'm not in a shadow of anything. To me, I'm like in the light. You know, everybody else, you know, that wants to get to know me, they're lucky that they get to know me, right? Because I'm very, yeah, I mean, it's not that I'm proud, it's just like, I'm happy with who I am, and I'm not going to go bust anybody's door down to say, you gotta be happy with me and all that. No, I'm just like, hey, if my peace and my love and everything is attractive, and you get to know me, then we'll be right.
You want to be able to share things.
That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much for all the comments and the questions. That does have to be our last comment or question. And I do want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing their experiences, their thoughts, and their ideas. It's obvious that the conversation needs to be continued. I don't know so much about a revolution, but certainly there needs to be conversation, communication, and a lot of sharing and education between our people and the United States in a general sense. Thank you, Veronica Goldbach, for your information, Edna Campos Gravenhorst for sharing your time with us here. Compean for your experience and your memories, and Dr. Gutierrez for your knowledge and wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, audience.